Hey everybody, it's Robert Dinan, your Florida realtor, and we're here with All Things Luxury, All Things Florida. And today I have Walter Melnick as our guest, my beloved uncle, not by blood, but
Pretty close.
by love and
maybe even
relationship
closer
here.
than blood.
Yeah, maybe even closer than blood. So I have Walter here today. He's had extensive experience in the operation stage of natural disasters in the relief and recovery side of things for over 20 years. And coming off all the media and all the things that are happening in the space after Hurricane Helene and Milton, I think Walter's expertise here is going to be something that a lot of people are going to find value in. So again, Walter, thank you for coming here today. Appreciate you being here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started in the space and kind of go from there? Because you have an extensive history along with the NYPD prior to getting involved in this as well.
Well, my first career was with the NYPD for 32 years. I retired when I got hurt. A few years after I had retired was the World Trade Center disaster. And most of the police officers that were killed at the Trade Center disaster were people that I had selected for their jobs and trained them for emergency service. It was one of the units that was under my command at the time, and it was very personal to me. Not only was it an attack on my country and my city, but on my personal friends. It was quite emotional, and I wanted to give something back to the country and to those guys who I had put in that position where they were killed. So I looked around at what government jobs would help their families, them, and myself to recover from the disaster. And I found FEMA, and I had never heard of FEMA. In New York City, there's not a lot of
I don't think there was much stuff with FEMA in the past.
It wasn't something that I was really familiar with, but I applied for several jobs with FEMA, from low-level entry positions to running the disaster, and they thought I was a little bit odd, and they didn't believe my resume because, again, I had 32 years in the police department. I'd risen to a pretty high rank, was in charge of most of the specialty units in New York City Police Department at the time. And they doubted the veracity of the resume. But it happened that one of the actually high-ranking members of FEMA at the time had been my driver at one point in the police department.
Small world.
He said, "Hey, was that Walter Melnick?" And as I was leaving, I didn't see him. He saw me. And they said, "Yeah, he's some widow from," he says, hire him. And anyway, they hired me. And I ended up as the chief of staff and the chief of inspections and the chief of public assistance, which is the infrastructure side of disasters.
And this was during
the 9/11.
New York City.
And we did something that has never been done in a FEMA disaster before. Within 2 years, we had completed the World Trade Center disaster. We had given away all the money, had done all of the assessments. And, of course, the building of everything took quite a while. The Trade Center itself took quite a while to build, although that wasn't a federal project. But the infrastructure was quite amazing. The streets in New York are probably 60 or 70 foot down with infrastructure for plumbing and electric and communication systems and subways and all sorts of stuff. And all of that had to be coordinated. It was truly
a big mess.
It was a big mess, but it was a very interesting project. And we completed it in 2 years. Again, the construction took a lot longer to do. Then I thought I was going to be retired again. And they had other plans and said, "Hey, why don't you come to Florida, where we just had, I think it was 4 hurricanes in 2003. So I said, well, come on down. It'll be nice. Well, I went down and I got involved in FEMA normal disaster work, which was, again, 4 hurricanes. And the biggest issue at the time was not the infrastructure, but the fact that there were about 30,000 Floridian families who had no housing and had no way of...
30,000 homeless families at the time.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the progress was going very, very slow. At the time, FEMA was kind of a one-trick pony with travel trailers. So from the travel trailers, we're moving out very, very slowly.
So when you say travel trailers, you're talking about something to replace their current living space for them to move
as
in.
A temporary shelter.
Yes,
for. They would put
bedrooms, bathrooms, like a mobile home.
If the person had room in front of their house or alongside their house, FEMA would come in and drop a travel trailer and let them live in it until their home was repaired. I think it's 11 foot wide and about 20 foot long, but it's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but it's certainly a good base so that you can repair your home. So it's not a horrible option, But it turns out that it's very expensive for FEMA, and I'll get into that a little bit later with another project that we did. But it's not the best because the money that's going into that just dies. It's just a kind of a waste of money. It's nice for the travel trailer industry and the people who install it and remove it. They make money, but it doesn't help the homeowner get back in his place. It just gives them a might
gives
as well
them a
be
place
a
to
motel
stay,
room.
but
Gives them a
not,
place
but
to
not,
stay,
but
doesn't
not to help
contribute.
rebuild.
Correct.
Right.
And again, FEMA is.
But that was their original, like you said.
Yes,
That's what
that
they
was
did.
it. They were a one-trick pony. That was it. And FEMA is a giant federal bureaucracy, and they move very slowly. And Jeb Bush was the governor at the time, and he was incensed at the slow pace, as was the small group. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of FEMA employees at the time, and there was a small group of about a dozen people that were in my group. And we were actually originally came down to start to do some infrastructure work, but we noticed the slow pace ourselves. So we tried to figure out where the choke points were and how to make it better. And we put together a white paper. And when Jeb Bush sent down a team of his people to scream and holler at us, rightfully so, we already had a white paper together as to what could be done, should be done. And we set up call centers. We hired outside people. We didn't use FEMA people. We hired an outside call center, much more efficient, and got things running. And we got the 26,000 trailers installed within 6 months, which was better than it was. We weren't very happy about it, but one of the nicest things that I ever did that I felt the most reward for was there was a group up in Pensacola, FEMA group, and we kept, we had daily meetings where we would say, well, where are you? How many trailers did you set? How many people did you put in the trailers? Because setting a trailer is great, but if you don't have a family in it, it's no good. And
yes, it's not being, you're not using the resources. What is the resource for?
So it was Christmas Eve of 2003 where we flew up, and we basically took over the center where they had a dozen of our people, and we took over the center from the FEMA folks that were there and just said, well, what you're doing is just not working. We're taking over right now. And we just started calling people at random that were on the list. And I called the woman, I don't remember her name, I'll say Mary Jones, and I get her on the phone, and it's like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. It's dark. It's a cold, Pensacola gets cold, a cold night, and again, Christmas Eve. And I said, is this Mrs. Jones or Miss Jones? And she said, yes, it is. I said, this is Walter Melnick. I'm from FEMA. Do you still need housing? And she said, yes. And I said, well, are you ready to move into something immediately? And she said, yeah. I said, can you get over to the corner of Walk and Don't Walk? And she says, who is this? This is just not right for somebody to be kidding me about this and to, it's very mean of you. And I said, ma'am, I'm asking you because I have a trailer for you. If you want a trailer and you can get there, you can be in it tonight. And she started crying, and she said, I'm here in my car with my daughter. We're living in the car, and we're cold, and, we've been in this way for months.
Oh, my goodness.
And I can't believe it, and it's Christmas, and I wished her a Merry Christmas
miracle.
And I told her
Christmas
where to
miracle.
go. So that, I think, was the pinnacle of my 79 years
great,
what I did.
Yeah, great phone call, right?
Yeah,
great phone call.
It was
Great phone
wonderful.
call.
And that's why you get hooked on FEMA work, because you do a few things like that once in a while. And, you say, this is worth it. You're actually doing something for somebody.
Right.
That's what happened there. We worked there, and then Katrina hit. And Katrina was...
the big one in Louisiana.
Yeah, and it hit several states. The big housing missions were in Mississippi and Louisiana, and we worked on that, and we placed about 100,000 travel trailers in a relatively short period of time. But, there were a lot of challenges there, including elevating of the units because...
below sea level.
Yeah.
Below sea level.
There were a lot of issues. Oh. We did that. I got fed up with FEMA at the end of that. I left FEMA, and I got called by some of the people that had done work for FEMA.
Vendors too?
Went back to them.
Like vendors to FEMA?
Yes.
Okay.
And they said, oh, can you help us do this and that and the other thing? I went to work for them. Then another company called me to go work back on the infrastructure side for FEMA. And for years and years, I went back and forth doing that. I would either work for FEMA or for the other side.
Yeah,
In other words, in some points I worked for Louisiana, and sometimes I worked for FEMA. So
Right.
while FEMA is helping them, it is an adversarial position at
Right.
times because you're arguing over, what benefits someone's going to get.
And when you're saying benefits somebody's going to get, at that point in time with FEMA,
Mm-hmm.
it was strictly like, going back to your statement, one-trick pony. Was it still just travel trailers at this time now?
Yes,
Because you're several years deep now.
Right. We started proposing other options. We started taking over empty big box stores and converting them into housing.
So like the Home Depots and things like that?
Yes. If they were empty, out
Emptier,
of business,
yeah, right, out of
we
business.
would convert them into housing. And
The old big lots and things like
yes.
that. Right.
So we started to be, there has to be other options. And while a travel trailer might be something good, we have to get you back closer and closer to your home. The goal is to get you back in your home or another home if your home can't be done. When people move away, and it's the same thing with businesses, if people move away and get their kids into school somewhere else because they don't have housing,
they're not coming
they don't
back.
come back.
They don't
Very
come back.
often they don't come back. Sometimes they do because they may
You
have
saw,
family
you saw a lot
there.
of that in Louisiana, but in Texas.
Absolutely.
They all went to Texas.
Yeah,
A lot of people went to
they,
Texas.
and they stayed.
Yeah.
So you lose your population. Small businesses typically don't survive if they're out of business for 2 weeks. It's a very, very high percentage. If
Right.
their rent continues, they lose their workers.
Lost
the
product.
facility
They
has
lost
to be
product.
done.
They lost
product.
Yeah, whatever they may do.
They don't have
Yeah.
sufficient insurance. No one ever
No
has
electric,
enough.
no everything.
Yeah,
So
and even if they open, if
No
their
one's coming,
clientele
right.
isn't
Yeah.
there,
Who's coming to
who
buy?
are they
Who are they
selling
servicing?
to? It doesn't work. So, and the same, with people, it's the same thing. So if you lose them, you might have lost them forever.
Yeah.
And
So when you're talking about FEMA, you're talking about relief, and you're talking about all these things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know this is leading into other areas for discussion, but does FEMA strictly go after just helping homeowners, or is it business, homeowners, municipalities? How does it
two
work?
basic sides to FEMA. There's the public assistance side, which is your government infrastructure, government and private nonprofits. Hospitals and things like that are covered. If it's a for-profit hospital, FEMA doesn't cover it. FEMA doesn't cover businesses. FEMA doesn't cover for-profit people either. An apartment house, they won't fix an apartment house. They will help fix a single-family home.
So if you own an apartment house and you have 126 doors and you got 1,000 people living there, it doesn't matter.
Correct. They don't take care of it.
That seems like something they should. You have more people living in an area. That's more people to drive business, more people to help.
The individuals are entitled to relief under the individual assistance side of
So the
FEMA.
people who live in the apartment.
Correct.
Okay.
But the building owner doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Just fact of life. There have to be some sort of rules set up.
Of course.
Right.
Understandable.
So the public assistance side, again, is infrastructure, government, private nonprofits, and the individual assistance side is what it says. It's the individual assistance. It's the homeowner or the person that needs shelter.
On that case,
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking about, first things to do after the storm, let's start with the business owner or, the municipality or county or parish or whatever it may be. What are the first steps for them to do when it comes down to it? Because I feel like there's a lot that FEMA can share, but I feel like they share this much. There's not sharing a lot. Obviously, these storms and things don't happen all the time. Natural disasters don't happen all the time. So this is not a common occurrence where people know the ins and outs of the system itself. So, I feel like municipalities, the political leaders in the space don't understand or know what the things to do or to ask for. So,
FEMA is really a reimbursement agency, and the state runs the response.
because the state has to call them in, right?
Correct.
Right. And now do they call that in when they claim an emergency? Or how does that work?
Yeah, FEMA and the states work together on an approaching storm. FEMA will have someone in the state's emergency operations center. FEMA may open their own emergency operations center as well, and there's constant communication between the two. Usually, if something's coming in, they'll get a declaration for preparedness. The operation center itself, the sandbag operations, the preparedness is paid for by FEMA. Even though it's a funding agency, they'll stage massive amounts of water because the state does too, but they're kind of ready to help because the states often get overwhelmed. The localities almost always get overwhelmed.
Well, I remember that was a big thing, and I'm not to point fingers, but, that was a big thing with Louisiana. Like the governor was not saying it's an emergency. FEMA was sitting on the outskirts of Louisiana and not allowed to come into the state almost.
Well,
I mean, it was like...
we were allowed. I was there like 2 days before.
Okay.
So, we knew it was coming. We were watching it swing around in the Gulf as to where it was going to land. We were actually going from place to place, not knowing where it was going to
be, right.
And, and we holed up in Baton Rouge because when it looked like it was going to hit New Orleans itself, we said, well, you don't want to be right where the disaster hits. You want to be outside so that you can then respond. You don't want to be a victim yourself. Emergency responders want to stay safe so that they can
You don't want to
help.
You don't want to
want
stage where
somebody
the
to have to come
incident's
and
going to
save
happen.
you.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want to add to it.
Yeah.
So we were there with lots of resources, but they still have to turn you on. The state, like Florida is very capable of handling their response. The response, I think they did a great job, particularly with two of them coming in.
With Helene and Milton. Right. I think we were just talking about this. I think they've done a fantastic job.
The evacuations were done, I think, great. My house got 3.5 foot of water. Some people in Pinellas County on the beaches died because they didn't leave. You can't knock on every door and drag the people out. You can knock on the door, but if they don't answer...
I think it's 11 people died in the hurricane,
that, yeah.
Which is, not good.
If you didn't have a mandatory evacuation and you didn't have the shelters set up where people could go, and a lot of people went on their own.
The infrastructure of the whole situation would have been a hell of a lot worse.
I don't know anyone that really would have... Well, people would have survived because it was only... My house got 3.5 foot of water. So... There's a good chance I would have survived, but there's also a good chance that I would have gotten knocked over, and who knows what would have happened.
It was snapping doors when the water was coming in. It was breaking doors right in half.
Yeah.
And it was like a ship flooding.
Yeah.
For a lot of the places, from what even my neighbors have told me. We were evacuated, but that's just Helene. People, it wasn't evacuation for Helene like it was for Milton, but everybody's like, we shouldn't have never stayed. Thank God we stayed on the second floor.
Yeah. Well,
thank God they had a second floor. Yeah, thank God they had a second floor.
Yeah. But recovery is another thing. If your local officials haven't personally gone through a disaster, it becomes overwhelming. In fact, it's hard to shift from the response mode to the recovery mode. What are we going to do tomorrow? They're saying, get everybody out, make sure everybody's fed, keep everybody safe. That's the priority always, and it should be.
Right.
But you should have somebody in the background saying, what are we going to do next week? What are we going to do next month? What are we going to do in 2 months? What are we going to do in 6 months? Because if you don't
the rescue and recovery is over.
If you don't plan your recovery, it's going to happen anyway, but it may not happen the way you want it.
Oh, so you're saying like recovery after the storm
exactly.
for the people.
What gets done
not
after
the rescue
that
part inside.
initial thing.
Right. Okay.
Many localities have standing debris contracts because this happens a lot, and they have the guys on call, and they just call, and they come in, they know where their debris sites are, they measure their trucks ahead of time because every couple of years they get it, they mark them up, and it's seamless. Mm-hmm. And Treasure Island has never really been hit, right? This year it's swamped. I don't know if they have their own debris contractors yet. And, and I'm not picking on Treasure Island at all because no one wants to have a contract with a place that never gets hit.
Right. I mean, that would be a 2-year deal, and that would have been dissipated 30, 40 years ago.
Why would you even compete on an RFP for something that never happens?
Right.
So it's difficult for them to do that, and they don't understand. All of the beach areas in Pinellas County don't truly understand what the program is. There may be some people who have worked in a state position or from another locality that understand the FEMA process. But it's a process. It's not an easy system to go through. There's rules, there's regulations. Just like many of us have flood insurance. Until you've personally been flooded, you don't know what you have to do. And everyone will say, well, take pictures. Yeah, you have to take pictures of everything. You really have to count everything that got lost. I probably lost 500 CDs and VHSs and stuff that my wife collected for years and years and years. We had collections of everything, all marked nice. And it was upended in a big chest, drenched, soaking wet. I took a picture of a big pile and tossed them out.
What are you gonna do?
That's the best you can do.
Yeah.
Am I going to get full credit for it? Probably not. I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah. Well, the furniture too, and all those things have gone out to the curb. And these,
absolutely.
I think that they've done a great job. I mean, just the other day, and yesterday, they had the big dump truck and they had the machine behind it picking up all the natural stuff.
Okay,
the sticks, the branches, the this, the that. That's all they were picking up. They weren't going to pick it up if it was in bags, but if you take it out of the bags, they're picking it up. So, I mean, they've done a fantastic job, I think, in Florida as a whole. I mean, especially being this is a fresh wound.
Yep.
This is a fresh wound. I think they're doing a great job. But again, to go back to business versus, municipalities versus the individual. What does the individual have to do?
The first thing, if they haven't done it already, is you go onto FEMA.gov and make an application. Whether they had severe damage, light damage, fill out an application, get the application in, and get two in, one for Helene and one for Milton, if they've had damages or been affected by both.
Right.
And affected just means if you had to evacuate your house and nothing happened to your house, you were still affected. Did you stay in a hotel? That may be an eligible expense for you. But if you don't apply, you'll
never
get
know.
it.
Yeah.
Right. And I believe on this one, FEMA's going to give everyone, I think it's $770 or $750 for each.
$750, yeah.
Whatever it is. And you'll get that for each one. And personally, I suggest you have it deposited directly into your checking account. You have an option, a check,
Right.
or into your checking or savings account.
ACH happens faster.
Well, not only faster, the mail is not great right now.
Yeah.
I know they're still not delivering on Treasure Island, and I'm lucky. I have a brother-in-law that lives a couple miles away, so I've relocated there. But I was supposed to receive advance checks for my insurance. You could apply for $5,000
Right.
contents. I haven't received it. I don't know whether they sent it.
Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
And these adjusters and everything coming out too is another issue for people as well. I mean, how many adjusters do we have?
Yeah, I mean,
How much will the insurance cover? That's another thing.
well, flood insurance covers up to $250,000 for the building and about $50,000 for your contents, up to, minus your deductible. And what most people don't realize is there's depreciation on both the building and the contents.
Right. Just like when you sell your car, same thing.
Yeah.
Just like if your car gets in a car accident, too bad it was 2012.
Yeah.
You're getting
$100.
2024 pricing. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a wake-up call because I went to a furniture store just to kind of make comps for the things I lost. And I said, wow. In just 5 years, which, some of my stuff was 5 years old, some new, some older. I said, but the last time I remember any pricing, it's gone up a lot in the last 5 years.
Oh, please.
Crazy.
Ever since 2020, the furniture prices have gone skyrocketed.
Yeah. I mean,
like everything else, too.
Yeah.
I mean, everything else has skyrocketed as well. I mean, with inflation and everything that's happened. So
I have sliding glass doors in the back. And
they need to be replaced probably now, too?
Oh, yeah, there's water inside them. It broke the seal, and, they're pretty messed up. And I got an estimate just for the windows of...
The doors, the sliders.
Sliders, $72,000. That's not installed. So I have...
That's just for doors.
Right. So installed, it'll probably be...
And now those doors are going to be obviously hurricane standard, all that kind of stuff, too.
Well, they were hurricane standard.
Right.
But... when the force of water, and that's why you have to evacuate.
Right.
Thankfully, people evacuate.
Hide from wind, run from water.
It's brutal.
Mm-hmm.
My house is, solid construction. It ripped out a wall, not when it came in, but the water had to go out, so it found the weakest point and ripped the wall out.
Jesus.
It's just a hole about 4 by 4. It doesn't affect the structure really, but it shows you
the
what
force
it
and
can do.
power of the water. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, you got to hide from wind, run from water.
So the first thing you have to do is apply to FEMA.
And it's FEMA.gov.
FEMA.gov.
Yeah.
And SBA, even with FEMA, at the end of your FEMA individual assistance thing, if you have unmet needs that haven't been there, you still may be able to apply for an SBA low-cost loan. And with businesses can apply for an SBA loan also in most cases.
Right.
And at least it's low cost. If someone wants to get back in business, it can help.
Okay.
They have to be repaid, as all loans do.
Yeah.
But, it is an available government resource.
Because, a lot of these insurance claims, right, I don't know if they're going to be denied, right, but they're not going to pay you what you think you should get, like you just talked about. There's going to be depreciation involved.
Yeah.
But, despite what you say, you're also going to have the adjuster going to say what he says, too.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
If you've had severe damage and you have the resources, is it smart to have a private adjuster come too? How does that work? You're obviously familiar with the space, so
sure. If you're not good with paperwork, I would recommend you at least talk to an adjuster and see what the cost is. You know, everyone has a different deal as to how they can help you. And certainly if you're not good with paperwork.
Well, I mean, just our
you should
discussions
consider
on
it.
what you've been doing have been, you've been sharing with me. But I mean, I wouldn't have thought of half the things that you were doing. Rob, you got to do this. You have to do this. You got to do this. You got to mark this. You got to write this. You have a spreadsheet this. And they're going to probably give you a spreadsheet to fill in anyway. So, you know.
Unfortunately. And again, my insurance adjuster seems like a pretty decent guy. I've spoken to him and emails and texts back and forth. But I know I blew by my $50,000 of contents, in my opinion. And I said to him, he had to run for Milton. You know, they made him evacuate for Milton.
Because he was coming before Milton, right?
He was down. He was getting ready to come and visit the house. And he says, I got to run. You know, they're telling me I have to evacuate. And I'll, when I come back, we'll set up an appointment. And I said, okay, while you're gone, can we work? I think I'm beyond my...
X, right? Yeah, 50,000.
My 50,000. So, why don't I just submit that stuff and I can stop. I don't have to keep
adding more. Yeah, right.
And I had put together a nice spreadsheet and comps that I had put together, where I got the comp from, everything else. I have a picture for most of the items, and I had an average cost for certain things that there were a lot of. And I don't know, if we would have argued over those or not. But he said, oh, okay, I'll send you the spreadsheet that it must be submitted on, which I wish I had in advance.
Prior, yes, right.
Because it's entirely different than what I put
Well, again,
down.
being an expert in the field, you knew what to do.
Well, I knew at least
to set it up that way. To capture
Unfortunately, I didn't realize I had
you needed his
spreadsheet.
Right.
And the same thing with, I have pictures of doors and measurements of doors. I don't know, I have about 20 doors that were destroyed in the house. I'm not talking about the glass doors, just interior doors.
Right.
And I took measurements and whatever. I'm sure he wants to do it by room. I had 20 doors, 3 this size, 5 that size, 2 the other size, and add it up. He's going to want them by room because he goes through it room by room.
Yeah,
so a lot of the work I did is going to be duplicated. And I'm in the business, so, it's hard for...
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're not a neophyte to
Right.
this, so it's like,
Right.
That's a very, it is overwhelming for a lot of people. Especially, if you're out of electric, you don't have access to this. I mean, other parts of Florida still out of electric. You're talking about North Carolina and other parts of southern U.S. that's been tragically hit by these things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they want you to apply for stuff, but half these people don't have any access to do it, too.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. I mean, is there a point where FEMA is going to say, well, we just can't do anything? I mean, because we're looking at insurance companies, right? You're looking at insurance companies, especially some in Florida, right? Like that are set up by the state that have X in the fund, and they've already overshot it by billions.
Well,
I mean, hundreds of millions. So
I think.
So how does that work with me? Is FEMA have a certain number where it ends?
No. FEMA is
because that's what everybody's been saying, right? That's the talk of the town. Well, FEMA has no money anyway. They gave it all away. They did this. They did that. They gave it to
FEMA is funded
immigrants.
by the Disaster Relief Fund.
Okay, so what's that?
It's at the beginning of the year or when they pass the budget, whenever that may be. It's always different. They set aside a certain amount of money for FEMA. And FEMA often goes back to Congress saying, we've spent, or we're down, we only have $1 billion left, or we only have $2 billion left, or whatever, and there's a storm coming in, can you replenish the fund? Which they do. Sometimes, around budgetary crisis times, they'll say, no, we want you to go back and take unused money. And what I mean by that is FEMA doesn't give, it's a reimbursement program. So let's say a bridge is washed out and it's a $50 million bridge. FEMA will, and they'll come up with a cost estimate and say, okay, we're going to give you $50 million for this bridge. It's put in a fund that they can draw down on. But they can only draw down after they pay the contractor for the work. And they can do it, they don't have to wait until it's completely finished.
Right.
But, in chunks. So if there's $50 million left and they figure it's going to take 10 years, to do, FEMA could go back and say, we're going to de-obligate $40 million from that because you're going to only spend $10 million a year, and we're going to use $40 million.
Understood. Gotcha.
Right. So it's a bookkeeping process. There's billions and billions that haven't been spent on the literally thousands of disasters that are open.
Could have been used.
Right. That they're funded and the money is obligated, but it's not spent yet. So sometimes Congress will say, no, go back and take some of that money that you have sitting
Because
there.
X didn't cost, it didn't
Right,
cost X.
because why
right.
should we put it forward?
Right.
Yeah. And other times they'll just say, okay, here's another $10 billion, and then there's enough for the hurricane season.
I just don't know when it turned to a B. I went from the M to a B. Everything's a B now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of in the World Trade Center disaster, we ended up spending $20 billion, and we had like $1 billion kind of left over, and it was hard for us to figure projects to give it to because it was.
Well, you were given to business owners down there, right? That were surrounding the space too, right? Or no?
No, what there was is continuity of business. If you kept people working and stuff, there was funding for that. It
Gotcha.
wasn't to rebuild that business. No.
Right.
It was never to rebuild the business.
Never to rebuild a business.
Right. Right.
So how does it? So
The SBA would cover.
SBA covers the
that,
business, yes.
right.
So what should people be doing now besides we talked about going to FEMA.gov. We talked about making the list for people to do. Right, because everybody's really concerned about, they're not concerned about the bridges, they're not concerned about anything, they're concerned about
Right.
their house.
Yep.
Right, and their home and what the next steps is for me to get back in my home. Or, am I going to get back in my home? Or do I care to get back in my home? Some people are, like you said, if they leave, they're gone.
Right.
Some people.
Well-
they still have an asset.
Yep.
But what will that asset be if it sits the way it's sitting?
Correct. So if they, regardless of whether they have insurance or not, but if they have insurance, notify their insurance company right away. Then they should, if they have the physical capability, they should remove all of their wet stuff that they can. And if they have the financial capability, they should have somebody come in and cut the sheetrock out below to where the
lines,
water
right,
line
right.
was. So, and you can cut if
Above
you had
where
2
the
foot,
water line was.
If you had 2 foot of water, you can cut to the 4 foot level because sheets come 4 by 8
Right.
and they lay them on the side, and that's the way you put them up. So that's where
Line
your
would be,
cut
right.
would be.
Yeah.
Don't cut at 5 foot if you had 3 foot of water because they'll only pay for it to 4 foot. And get the insulation out. And if you have air conditioning, still get the air conditioning. Get air in. Ventilate your house.
Right.
Because if a house is closed up, tight, doesn't have ventilation, and it's hot in Florida and it's wet,
You got 2 days.
it's all over.
Yeah.
And you don't want that water wicking up on the insulation inside the rest of your walls are going
Right.
to go as well.
Because it will.
Yeah, not that maybe your insurance company won't pay for it, but it's just a longer recovery process for
Right.
it. So get the wet stuff out, save what you want to try to save. And if it's salt water got in your house, there's not much that can be saved. But, I lost quite a few pictures, which hurts.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Because they really can't be replaced, but I've tried drying them, and I saved a lot of them.
Good.
But I have stuff laid out all over my brother-in-law's house, and drying out and taking it apart and trying to save the pictures, and so it keeps your mind occupied.
Right.
But people have to take care of themselves too.
Right.
Make sure they eat. Make sure they're getting a little exercise. Make sure they're going to church if they go to church. Make sure they are talking to other people. Community and friends and not being isolated is very
Yeah,
important.
the isolation part is what really would hurt people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
keep in touch. Notify your insurance company. Notify FEMA. FEMA can pay up to, the changes every year, I believe it's $42.5 for your housing, and it can pay $42.5 for other needs. Other needs might be you need a chainsaw to cut things up. You need a dehumidifier. You need.
So that's 42 and 42, or just
yes, 42
okay.
and 42.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a potential.
Yeah.
It's the average.
Wait, what's the average at most? So you're not looking at
$3,000.
$84,000.
3,000 is the average.
Yeah.
Child care and keep records. People have to keep records. I know it's very difficult, particularly when you don't have a place to live, but get receipts and everything, or now ask people to send you e-receipts, and then you can always recover them.
Yeah.
But again, child care is good. Relocation. You can rent a pod under that. And that 42 and 42 is only above what your insurance covers. It will also cover.
So they
your
take into
deductible.
account what you've received from insurance.
Yes. And there's no duplication of benefits.
Okay.
It's what.
So this is a process. This isn't something that's going to happen in 2 weeks.
It's been described as a marathon rather than a sprint.
Right.
So, while we all want everything to be resolved tomorrow, it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Contractors, workers are working
Night and day.
6,
Yeah.
7 days a
Yeah,
week.
It's crazy.
They're few and far between. They're tired as well. They were busy before the storms. And
Right.
Now
Right.
they have
Now
this
it's a whole
additional work.
recovery thing here.
It's nothing is going to happen fast. I personally you have to figure out your own plan. My plan is still not formulated, but I'm figuring out my options. I can repair my house as it is on site, same level. I can try to have the home elevated. I'm in a velocity zone 13, which means that if I were going to build new, I would have to build the lowest structural member has to be at 13
feet, right.
Everything else has to be above 13 feet. So I can try to have my house lifted. I don't know if that's feasible. I've called a bunch of companies, and the ones...
Yeah, but you had a lot of success with that with Sandy in New York City,
Yes.
right?
Sandy, we did some really interesting things, which I'll get into. Really interesting. I would say the most successful disaster from FEMA's perspective. I represented the city of New York.
Now, Sandy was a major hurricane that came through New York.
It wiped out thousands of homes. I don't know exactly how many thousand, but in New York City, we'll take a step back. The storm came in. It was the perfect storm. It was high tide. It flooded.
Full moon, right?
Yeah, everything was perfect to cause disaster. It flooded Lower Manhattan, Wall Street. The subways down there were underwater. It had never happened before. We had planned for it when I was in the police department. We had said 5 foot.
Well, there is that line on Water Street, right? The line on the building where the water used to be.
Yeah.
Right. The rest of Manhattan was added on just as they built out.
Much of Lower Manhattan is landfill.
Is landfills, dirt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dirt they were pulling from other places.
So we figured if a 5 foot surge come in, everything gets flooded. What do we do? And we had plans, and of course, you can't stop the water.
No, yeah.
The best.
You got that new thing that they just did around the hospital is quite phenomenal.
It's great. It's great.
I don't recall the name of that product. Do you remember the name of that product, Jan?
The Tiger Dam, or the one where it goes into the ground?
The one that goes into the ground.
Yeah.
It's like they surrounded the whole hospital in Tampa Bay.
I saw that in Prague, Czech Republic. The Danube every year floods. So in the spring, before it melts, they bring their army out, all of the civil service workers, everybody works together, and they have these big panels, like I think they're about 15 foot high. They come out with all sorts of equipment, and the whole lower part of Prague, which is an ancient city,
right?
They put these things in the ground, lock them together, and the water comes and goes up against it. Yeah. And when the spring floods are over, they take them down and they put them away for the next year. And that's the same product, or a very similar product. And they work great. And, but you can't put that around your house because it's just too much. You need heavy equipment, and, the expense, and where do you store all of that stuff.
Right.
But,
you're not putting that in your attic.
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. Not unless you have a very big attic.
Yeah. Is there anything that we didn't tap on today that you think we should before we wrap up?
Yeah, I want to say what we did in New York, and it's something that Florida should be considering right now. In New York, we did something we had talked about in FEMA circles for years. They did a rapid repair program, and what the city implemented it, and FEMA paid for it.
The City of New York implemented it.
City of New York.
But now you were involved with this rapid repair.
Yeah, we helped establish it. Yeah.
Okay. So you helped establish the program.
Correct.
Rapid repair.
Right. For years we had been proposing it, and they finally turned it on where we could use it. And we had about 2,000 contractors, and they went in and they gutted to the water line. They repaired the electric. In New York, it was October. Sandy hit New York in late October, so it gets cold in New York at that time. So we were repairing furnaces or boilers. We made sure they had a hot water heater. We made sure they had a sink and a stove, operational sink and stove in the kitchen, and a sink and a toilet and a shower in their bathroom.
So this was in lieu of
trailers, or
getting
people moving away.
Getting people into their homes.
Shelter
into their
homes. Place, into their home.
Into their home, yeah. Which is a fantastic program.
And within 3 months, we did 23,000 residential units, 1 and 2 family homes.
23,000.
23,000 in 3 months.
With this program.
With that rapid repair program. Yeah. And the program cost mid-40s thousands.
And the trailer costs are what?
The life cycle of a trailer, the FEMA economists figured out, was $186,000. So here we had the repairs done to the people's homes for $40,000 instead of spending $180,000 on a trailer, and they still would have had to put that $40,000 into their home.
Right.
And they were actually living relatively normally. We didn't close the sheetrock walls up. They only put the sheetrock over where the electric was, so kids wouldn't be pulling the wires and stuff like that. But, the house was basically fully functional. It was warm. They could go through the winter and stay at home. Schools, they said.
Everybody stayed there. So how do you think, why isn't this being brought into Florida now? Why isn't this happening now?
I think
why
we're
does
still
it not
stuck
work?
on response.
But who's stuck?
Everyone.
Okay.
Everyone. No one's asking for it yet.
But don't you think it should be being offered, is my question. I mean, why is this not offered everywhere? I mean, if it was only offered, I mean, was this offered, in Sandy? Sandy was after Katrina, if I'm correct on my timeline.
From what I understand, there's disagreement within FEMA on whether or not it was appropriate to do it. There's some questions about it. We used a similar program in the Virgin Islands. Two Cat 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, hit Virgin Islands in 2017, and they were pretty devastated. It was oddly, well, people down there are smart. They don't build on the beach.
Right. Yeah.
So there wasn't that surge affecting the homes, but the wind devastated their homes. And we use...
building standards are way different, too, down there.
Yes, much lax. Yeah. But we used rapid repair to fix much of the home, their windows and their doors and things like that. And then we used a similar idea using CDBG money. Community Development Block Grant money is a federal grant program, which in some ways mirrors, in big way, the more public assistance money that's given to a state. And public assistance, remember, that's the infrastructure.
Right.
That's the bridges, the hospitals, the schools, the roads, etc. Even the debris. The debris removal is covered by FEMA too, the cost of it. It gets a matching amount of CDBG money that is applied differently. There's a lot of discretion in how it can be used, but it also has to be used under a different set of rules than the FEMA rules.
Right.
But they used a lot of that money to put roofs on the homes because a lot of their roofs were torn off.
Right.
So, and putting a roof on in the Virgin Islands is very difficult because to do it
First
by
of all,
code.
It's an island.
Well,
getting the
all
stuff
the wood
there
has
is an
to
issue.
come in, but it's also their code because of the speed of the hurricanes that they experience on a regular basis. They have to build it with 3x wood.
Okay.
Instead of 2x, which ours are here, it's 3x. So it's kind of specially made wood. Has to be made here on the mainland, shipped there, and we have to bring workers. There's only 100,000 people live in the Virgin Islands, and they have maybe 1,500 construction workers out of that 100,000. Right. We had to bring in thousands of workers, and that makes the cost go up. Everything you do that you don't have on site costs more to do. And we did a couple of thousand homes there with those type of roofs with hurricane clips and stuff like that to make sure they didn't blow off again. So they're much more resilient than before. But in New York, we used the CDBG funds to do elevations. Both the state and the city had a program where they elevated houses, sometimes in really tight spots. Like, no
building to building, right? Like the old New York style building.
Yeah,
right.
New York,
Can't put a piece of paper between them. Yeah.
And they elevated those homes to, whatever the BFE is, the base flood elevation. So they put them up 10, 15 foot in some cases.
Right.
And that was paid for by the CDBG funds. That can be put in. That doesn't have to be done today, but it's something that the state has to be considering as one of their options. Do they want to spend CDBG money on elevation of homes that are going to be flooded again if they're not elevated?
Right.
There's no doubt about it. I'm not a denier or my hair's not on fire over the fact that if I eat a steak today, I'm going to contribute to global warming. But we are having significant weather.
Yeah, we are having significant weather.
And whether it's cyclical or not, and I don't want to get into politics of that, but it's going to happen again. It might not happen for another 50 years, but it might happen next year.
Right.
So elevation is a smart thing.
So do you think the rapid response program is going to be initiated in Florida? How do we get these, people in the positions of power to understand what's available too? Because FEMA's not just going to offer this stuff, right?
No, FEMA.
I mean, they're not going to say, "Hey, we got the rapid response for you. Here you go."
Right. Particularly if there's uncertainty within FEMA itself as to whether they want to do it.
Right.
There's different strategies that they have. And, the question is for the states to ask FEMA, well, what are you going to provide me? If I ask you, what can you give me? And you're going to say nothing, well, then I'm going to propose, well, give me rapid repair. You did it in New York, so let's do it here.
Right.
Or,
it would make a hell of a lot of sense for these beach communities. I mean, you have people looking to move,
Absolutely. They'll lose a lot of people, A lot of people, many don't have insurance. Or if they do, they don't have, it's not going to cover.
Yeah, it's not going to cover an elevation.
Everything.
Yeah.
It certainly won't cover an elevation.
No.
But they may not even have enough to do their repairs.
Right.
So what are they going to do? They're going to sell it. And then you're going to have empty houses sitting on the blocks for years for speculators to buy.
Right.
And then maybe they'll repair them. Maybe they'll build something else. But the uncertainty doesn't make for a good neighborhood. You want your neighborhood to be vibrant. You want people to be taking care of their lawn.
Right. What people's biggest asset, right?
Yep.
You know, the biggest asset. The old broken window theory too on properties.
Absolutely.
You know?
If
That's
it's boarded
amazing.
up
boarded
for
up
a
for
year,
6 years. Why should I stay here too?
Yeah.
You know,
Certainly
that's
drives down everybody else's real estate.
Well, they even said that's why, you know, Pinellas County, Manatee County, Charlotte County, Pasco County, Hillsborough, they're all hurrying up and picking up the stuff because, again, the mental anguish of the issue and everything still being there affects people over time too. So that's why they're trying to pick all this stuff up, get all the debris out of there. Obviously, there's danger to it too, but it also affects people, you know, from the daily basis living there, you know. So
and you know, it's all wet and it's all breeding mosquitoes.
Yeah, everything else. Yeah, everything that's involved.
We are in the tropics, and you know, there's all sorts of crazy bugs that can start dengue fever and all of the rest of the good stuff we don't need running around.
No, we don't. But I thank you for all your knowledge, Walter, and sharing that with everybody today. Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy to have you here, of course, and appreciate the time today. So I wanted to thank everybody for listening today. I hope this was helpful. And again, it's Robert Dinan, your Florida Realtor, on our podcast here, All Things Luxury, All Things Florida. Have a great day, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
By the way.
Oh, hold on 1 second here. What do we got?
I still love Florida.
I still love Florida, too.
This is the place to live.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I don't think anybody else are, too. We'll see you again soon. Take care.